Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, lawmakers have some big issues to tackle as the 2022 session enters its second half. From a new ballot initiative to competing tax cuts plans from both the House and the Senate, and much more. Mississippi Today's Adam Ganesha breaks down the big bills in play. Also, we're going to examine affordable housing issues. Dr. Emily Hamilton joins us with strategies designed to help renters and buyers alike. And Y'all Politics, Alan Lange is here with a new list of Mississippi's top 50 influencers. It's a busy morning this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. We are just about halfway through the 2022 legislative session, and there are still some big policy initiatives in play. And we want to take a look at some of those initiatives and issues with our new guest. Next guest, that's Adam Ganucheau. He's editor-in-chief at the nonprofit news site MississippiToday.org. He's also host Mississippi Today's weekly podcast on the state politics, The Other Side. Adam, welcome back to Mississippi Insight.
Thanks so much, Byron. Good to be with you again.
Hey, I want to start with something that you talked about in your last podcast with reporters Bobby Harrison and Jeff Pender. It's the effort to restore Mississippi's ballot initiative process. Remind our viewers what's at stake here and why some lawmakers feel this effort is just so important.
Yeah, so of course, in May of 2021, the Mississippi State Supreme Court struck down the entire ballot initiative process. That, of course, is the process by which Mississippi voters can kind of bypass lawmakers and other policymakers and put constitutional changes or amendments on the ballot before voters. So that process, of course, the simple nature of it was, get tens of thousands, I think a little bit over 100,000 signatures from across the state, and you can put anything on the ballot. That's how we had the medical marijuana initiative on the ballot in November of 2020. So that marijuana initiative, of course, passed. Voters overwhelmingly passed that initiative. It was supposed to go into effect in I think the fall, August of 2021. But in July of 2021, the state Supreme Court struck down both the medical marijuana initiative and the entire process itself. So since May of 2021, Mississippi hasn't had a ballot initiative process, which not every state does, but most do. I think something like 31, 32 states have some sort of initiative process. And so what happened immediately after that state Supreme Court decision in May of 21, was state leaders across the board, really, they vowed to reinstate this process, to give that power back to voters. And there was talk of a possible special legislative session in the fall or early winter of 2021. That never happened. The Governor Tate Reeves never called it. So now we're in the regular session of the 2022 legislative year and calendar, and lawmakers have decided to take it up. So that's kind of the background of why we are where we are.
And why is it so important? Is it because the large margin on the marijuana bill? Is it why these lawmakers feel so passionate about passing this or doing something with this?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of passion to do something with it, and then that kind of fizzled, right? So the public backlash after that state Supreme Court decision in May of 2021 was pretty swift and pretty robust. It seemed like Mississippi voters across the board, both sides of the aisle, were pretty upset that they had lost this constitutional right to sort of take issues directly to the voters and bypass lawmakers. So that's what we saw initially. It's sort of as the backlash occurred right after the ruling, you saw lawmakers, legislative leaders, you saw the governor talking about the importance of reinstating some version of a ballot initiative process, and lawmakers across the board kind of followed suit. And I think the general consensus right now, it seems like most lawmakers think that something should be done, but there hasn't been a great sense of urgency seemingly in addressing this problem. And there's still a lot of work and a lot of sort of hand-wringing to determine what exactly a reinstated ballot initiative process might look like. I mean, it's very possible they're not going to do it this session, although there is a House bill that has passed at least the House chamber. They were the first ones in the legislature this year to address this, and we'll see. The House bill is kind of an interesting animal. It's not the exact same as the previous initiative process that we had in Mississippi. So briefly, the initiative process we had before it was struck down last year allowed voters to amend the state constitution. That's a big deal because, it's hard to do that, and it's really hard to change the Constitution after it's been changed. So in order to amend the Constitution at any point, you have to have 2/3 vote of both chambers of the legislature to agree, and then a majority of Mississippi voters have to concur at the ballot box.
Is it likely we're going to have a tax cut this session, or is that going to end up falling?
Yeah, that is the big question right now, Byron. It's sort of the all-encompassing question that I believe is going to dictate what passes and what fails across the board, not just related to tax or fiscal policy. So setting the scene really quickly on that, it's interesting. So Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann on the Senate side has proposed implementing complete elimination of one single personal income tax bracket, the 4% bracket. That would, certainly be a revenue hit, but he also wants to cut some other taxes too. He wants people to pay less at the grocery store. We have the highest in the nation grocery tax of any state. He wants to cut that. There are some other smaller elements of Hosemann's plan, but it's kind of economists believe it to be sort of a modest tax cut plan. It could affect revenues, but everybody seems to think that it would be a wash in the end. I think sort of some other offsetting revenues would cover the hole that the income tax cut would leave on the Senate side. But the House side is the really interesting sort of thing for us to watch, I think, in the next few weeks. House Speaker Philip Gunn, he has called his tax cut proposal, the most important legislation of his political career. This is a veteran politician. He's been around a long time, certainly wields a lot of power on the House side of the building. He wants to completely eliminate the income tax, which is a lot farther than Lieutenant Governor Hosemann's plan or proposal. So what that means effectively, Byron, is that the income tax makes up about 1/3 of our state's general fund revenue collections every year. So the general fund is what funds basic services like, education, like public safety, like mental health, and, you name the state agency, it's almost always funded out of that general fund budget. So 1/3, about 33% of our revenue that covers that budget every year comes from the personal income tax. House Speaker Philip Gunn wants to eliminate that tax altogether. Now, to help pay for that, he wants to increase sales tax from our 7% to, I think, 9%. I don't have it right in front of me, but it's a couple percentage points increasing that sales tax figure. He also wants to cut the grocery tax a little bit. He also wants to cut the car tags. That tax cut plan from House Speaker Philip Gunn it does a lot more, and it goes a lot farther. And economists fear that it's going to affect the state's budget or the state's revenue collections a lot more sort of negatively over the short and long term. So what we're seeing right now, you've got like I said, the more modest tax cut proposal from the Senate and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann. You've got a pretty robust tax cut proposal from House Speaker Philip Gunn. They are very far apart on that. That was one of the things I talked about with Lieutenant Governor Hosemann this past week in that live event that we did, was sort of, look, y'all are far apart on this. Can you come together? Is there room for compromise here? Is this salvageable at this point? Because you're seeing House and Senate leaders both being critical of the other side's tax cut proposal. I think this is going to be a fight. I mean, a real fight. I think it will be by far the biggest fight between Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann and House Speaker Philip Gunn since Hosemann took office, 2 years ago.
Adam Ganucheau, MississippiToday.org. Thank you for joining us. It's always a good pleasure and getting a lot of information from you when we talk.
Of course, Byron. Thanks for having me as always, and thanks for everything y'all do.
All right, and we'll be right back. Mississippi has some of the least expensive housing costs in the nation, but we also have some of the lowest median household incomes to pay those costs. Even here, the cost of living, and especially for housing, are not cheap. Affordable housing is a big issue here and nationwide. We want to look at strategies that some communities are pursuing to address shortages of affordable housing. Dr. Emily Hamilton is a senior research fellow and director of the Urbanity Project at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Dr. Hamilton, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there seems to be a little doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge economic impact on Americans. What effects do you see in the housing market?
In the beginning days of the pandemic, there was a huge drop-off in housing permitting and housing starts across the whole country, as many localities paused housing permitting due to health concerns, and home builders figured out how to work safely during the pandemic. And so that big temporary drop-off in housing construction meant that houses were not coming online. Homes weren't getting built and apartments weren't opening at their typical rate. And so that drop-off has taken a while to catch up. That big decline in housing construction has caused nationwide housing affordability challenges. And that's on top of the ongoing challenges that face households in those coastal regions that are always in the news for housing affordability problems, but also in places across the whole country, including Mississippi, where households with low incomes struggle to find housing that fits within their budgets.
How big a problem is racial discrimination in today's housing market?
Today's land use regulations grew out of purposeful efforts to segregate neighborhoods and localities by race. Once the Supreme Court ruled that localities could not implement regulations that specifically determined who could buy which houses as a result of their race, localities then turned to land use restrictions like exclusive single-family zoning and large lot size requirements to separate people directly on a basis of income and indirectly by race. So that's the legacy of our current land use regulations. And because minority households tend to have lower incomes than white households today, rules that increase the price of housing disproportionately harm minority households.
You look at policies and practices that many communities use to make renting or owning a home more affordable. So what works, and what are local and state leaders doing to ease these costs for residents?
So the root cause of housing affordability problems are land use restrictions like bans on apartment buildings, minimum lot size requirements that require each new house to sit on a large piece of land, and parking requirements that can drive up the cost of building new housing and limit how much of it can get built. Some localities have made big reforms in these areas. Many localities have addressed their parking requirements in recent years, and Houston provides an interesting example of minimum lot size reform. They reduced their lot size requirement down from 5,000 square feet down to 1,400 square feet, which has made much more townhouse construction feasible, and has contributed to Houston having a lower median house price relative to the country as a whole, in spite of many decades of fast growth. On the income side, the most effective and efficient way to help households afford quality housing is with income supports to tenants. So policies like vouchers can help the most low-income households for a given dollar amount to afford housing that works for their families.
Dr. Emily Hamilton, thank you for joining us and great information.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. The latest Mississippi Top 50 list has been released. It's an annual list of the people who are judged to be the most influential leaders in the state. The bipartisan selection is sponsored by several groups, including WJTV and Y'all Politics. Joining us via Zoom is Alan Lange. He is the founder and publisher of Y'all Politics. Alan Lange, welcome back to Mississippi Insight.
Hey, thanks, Byron.
Alan, just remind us what the Mississippi Top 50 is all about.
Yeah, the Mississippi Top 50 is an annual list. This is our fifth iteration of the list that we've done that recognizes the most influential people in the state of Mississippi on an annual basis. We break it up into kind of several different categories. Certainly, people in the government sphere are influential. We have kind of a lobbying and government relations sphere, and then we have kind of a catch-all category called the business, media, and culture sphere. And all three of these different areas have people nominated to them on an annualized basis. And again, we just really try to figure out, on an annual basis, who are the most influential people in the state of Mississippi.
Talk about some of the notable selections in this latest list.
Yeah, well, so every year, we have obviously the 50 awardees in the different categories, but it really all culminates with an event, and we recognize two people outside of that for what we call Hall of Fame status. And this year, the honorees were Joe Sanderson and Representative Alice Clark. Joe Sanderson, everybody will recognize as Sanderson Farms. Just an amazing businessman and touched the lives of thousands of people through his business, but also a philanthropic leader. In the last couple of years, has spearheaded a $100 million campaign for the new children's hospital in Jackson. And of course, Representative Alice Clark, who was just instrumental in the lobbying effort for the state lottery, which has really transformed a big part of our state budget. And she was a voice in the wilderness for years and years in the state legislature, and is certainly recognized for that. And then, in terms of notable leaders, I mean, a lot of people just by the position they hold, the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker of the House, people that you might, reasonably expect. Mayors like Mayor George Flaggs of Vicksburg was recognized this year. Also, people kind of behind the scenes in government. Parker Bryden is the new chief of staff for Tate Reeves. There's just a variety of people in the government sphere to be recognized. Lobbyists, certainly in Capitol that hold a lot of sway. Claire Hester with Capital Resources, Quincy Mercuro, people throughout, we've recognized party leadership in the past. Political party leadership is a pretty regular occurrence on that list. And then the business, media, and culture, that's really kind of the fun category. It's a catch-all. If you watch college football on ESPN, Wright Thompson is a name that I'm sure he's kind of ESPN's kind of one of ESPN's most storied storytellers, lives in Oxford, restaurateurs, Scott and Julie Kessler in the Jackson area, people who are involved in food, people who are involved in religion, people who are involved in culture, people who are involved in business leaders like Lex Taylor in Louisville, and William Yates from the Yates Construction Company on the coast. So it's just a really eclectic mix of people around the state.
Was it hard to pare the list down to around 50?
Yeah, we've got, nominations from really all over the state, over 200 nominations. And we've got, folks recognized from, Corinth to the Gulf Coast, from Vicksburg to Meridian this year. I mean, it's just a really, I think it's important. And again, kind of the question that judges try to answer was, if you had something that you wanted to get done in Mississippi in a year, who are the people that you would conscript in that effort to get that done, right? They're not all just political leaders. They're thought leaders. They're people in business and culture, and that's really kind of, we try to kind of bind it all together in kind of a cohesive whole.
I know because of COVID, you haven't been able to get together for the actual program. What's happening this year? Are you going to actually be able to have the program this year face to face?
Yeah, no, last year was virtual, and so the Hall of Fame people that we were able to recognize last year, Judge Reuben Anderson, Wirt Yerger, former Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott. It's a shame that we couldn't do it because the fun part is the event, right? To get all of those people in the same room, no agenda. It really is a tailgate party almost atmosphere. One of the things that the world kind of envies about our culture, whether it's at Memorial Stadium or at the Grove in Oxford or the Junction or the Rock or, wherever, just our ability to be together and network with each other and how we know each other in Mississippi. And that's really kind of what the in-person event is all about. Sold out event at Old Capitol Inn. It's always a fantastic time.
Alan Lange, Y'all Politics. Always a pleasure talking with you, Alan. Thank you.
Hey, thank y'all.
All right, and we'll be right back. Our thanks to Adam Ganesha, Dr. Emily Hamilton, and Alan Lange for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.